For every god you know, there are 100 you've forgotten. Zeus, Thor, and Osiris survived in our cultural memory. But what about the thousands of deities who once commanded temples, sacrifices, and devotion? Today on Chronicus Blasphemous, we explore why some gods endure while others fade into obscurity and what that tells us about ourselves, the gods we remember, and the gods that time forgot. Good evening, Blasphemous folks. I'm Krista, and welcome to the very first episode of Chronicus Blasphemous. Today we're exploring a fascinating question. Why do some gods persist in our cultural memory for millennia, while others fade into obscurity? The pantheons of old were crowded places, with hundreds of deities governing every aspect of life. Yet today, we remember only a handful from each culture. In this inaugural episode, we'll examine the gods that survived in our collective consciousness and the far more numerous deities that time forgot. We'll explore what makes certain gods endure through centuries, while others, once worshipped by thousands, vanish from memory. Whether you're a mythology enthusiast, a role player seeking inspiration, or simply curious about how cultural memory works, this exploration of forgotten gods reveals as much about humanity as it does about divinity. So open your grimoires and prepare your offerings, as we begin our journey through the divine graveyard of forgotten gods. Zeus, Athena, Poseidon, and Aphrodite remain household names. But what about Koalamos, the god of stupidity? Or Charis, the god of opportunity? These once important deities have virtually disappeared from our collective consciousness. First, gods associated with universal human experiences tend to endure. Love, war, wisdom, death, these concepts transcend specific cultural contexts. Aphrodite and her equivalents across cultures remain relevant because love itself remains relevant. Second, gods with the most compelling stories survive. Norse mythology's Loki endures not because trickery was especially important to Vikings, but because his tales of mischief and cunning are simply unforgettable. The gods we remember are often those with the best narratives. Finally, adaptability plays a crucial role. Gods whose domains easily translate to modern concerns find new life in contemporary culture. Thor's association with strength and protection translates well across centuries, while for Seti, the Norse god of justice and reconciliation, faded despite his important role. Modern entertainment has become a new form of mythology, resurrecting certain gods while leaving others in obscurity. Marvel's cinematic universe has introduced Norse gods like Thor and Loki to millions who might never have encountered them otherwise. Neil Gaiman's American Gods revitalized interest in forgotten deities from multiple pantheons, from Slavic to African traditions. Video games like God of War have reimagined Greek and Norse pantheons for new generations, while shows like Supernatural have featured deities from dozens of cultures as characters. Even children's media like the Percy Jackson series has familiarized young readers with classical mythology. These modern storytellers have become the new priests and poets, keeping certain gods alive in our cultural consciousness. But this resurrection is highly selective. Media companies choose gods with visually striking attributes, clear powers, and compelling conflicts. The Egyptian goddess Batet, with her distinctive cat form, makes for better visual storytelling than Meshket, the goddess of childbirth. Ganesha's elephant head and multiple arms create an immediately recognizable silhouette, while Cardea, the Roman goddess of door hinges, lacks visual distinction. This selection process favors deities with domains that translate easily to modern narratives. War, love, and trickery remain relevant, while gods of grain mildew or boundary stones struggle to find their place in contemporary stories. The selection also tends toward the dramatic. Gods of death, destruction, and chaos appear far more frequently than gods of agriculture, healing, or crafts. Even within a single pantheon, we see this selective revival. Norse mythology's Thor, Loki, and Odin dominate modern media, while equally important deities like Tyr, Freyr, and Jord remain largely forgotten. This creates a distorted view of these ancient belief systems, reducing rich, complex pantheons to a handful of characters. This selective revival creates a fascinating feedback loop. Gods featured in popular media become more culturally relevant, which leads to more media appearances, further cementing their place in our collective consciousness while others slip further into obscurity. Consider how Thor's popularity surged after his Marvel appearances. This increased interest led to more Thor merchandise, references in other media, and even academic attention. Meanwhile, his brother Baldur, central to Norse mythology but less featured in modern media, remains relatively unknown to mainstream audiences. The loop becomes self-reinforcing over time. Writers and creators, themselves influenced by earlier media, tend to feature the same gods they're familiar with. Audiences recognize these figures more readily, creating a commercial incentive to continue featuring them rather than introducing lesser-known deities that require more explanation. This process mirrors how certain myths became dominant in ancient times. The stories that resonated most with people were retold more frequently, ensuring their survival while others faded. The difference today is the global scale and rapid pace of this cultural selection process. This media-driven revival profoundly shapes our understanding of ancient religions. For many people, their first and often only exposure to these deities comes through entertainment, not historical or religious education. The Thor of Marvel bears only passing resemblance to the Thor worshipped by ancient Norse peoples, yet for millions, the superhero version has become the definitive representation. This creates both opportunities and challenges for cultural understanding. On one hand, media has sparked renewed interest in ancient mythologies, leading some to explore the historical contexts and original stories. Academic books on Norse mythology saw sales increases following the Thor films, and tourism to sites associated with these gods has grown. On the other hand, these simplified, modernized versions risk overriding the authentic cultural significance these deities once held. Religious figures become reduced to superhero archetypes, divorced from their spiritual contexts and the communities that worship them. Perhaps most significantly, this selective revival shapes which aspects of ancient cultures we remember and value. The gods we choose to resurrect in our stories reflect our own preoccupations and biases more than they represent the complete worldview of ancient peoples. As we move forward, we might ask ourselves, what forgotten deities might still have wisdom to offer our modern world, if only we gave them screen time? For role players and game designers, forgotten gods represent a treasure trove of untapped potential. While players might recognize a cleric of Thor immediately, introducing a devotee of Hoder, the blind god who unwittingly killed Baldur, creates mystery and opportunities for storytelling. The world of tabletop RPGs thrives on the unexpected, on creatures, characters, and concepts that players haven't encountered 1,000 times before. Forgotten deities offer this freshness while still carrying the weight of authentic mythology. They exist in that perfect space between the familiar framework of gods and worship and the exciting territory of, I've never heard of this deity before. For dungeon masters and storytellers, these obscure gods provide hooks for quests, motivations for NPCs, and foundations for entire campaigns that won't feel derivative of popular media. Let's explore how to bring these forgotten immortals to your gaming table. Forgotten gods offer several specific advantages in game settings. First, they come with authentic mythological roots that provide depth. Unlike completely fabricated deities, these gods existed in real belief systems, giving them cultural context and established relationships with other divine beings. Second, their obscurity gives players and game masters creative freedom to interpret and expand their stories. With Thor or Zeus, players come with preconceptions from popular media. With Epona or Xipe Totec, you can develop aspects of their worship and powers without contradicting player expectations. Third, they create opportunities for players to learn about actual mythology through play. When a character encounters a temple to Zorya, the Slavic guardian of the Doomsday Hound, curious players might research the deity's origins, bringing real-world mythology into your game sessions. Finally, these forgotten gods often have domains and powers that aren't commonly represented in gaming, allowing for unique character builds and magical effects that can surprise even veteran players. Let me suggest some forgotten deities particularly well-suited for role-playing campaigns. Consider Epona, the Celtic horse goddess. A cleric of Epona might have unique abilities related to mounts, travel, and fertility, offering both combat and utility powers that distinguish them from typical war or nature clerics. Xipe Totec, the Aztec god of rebirth through sacrifice, provides a morally complex deity for characters who believe in necessary suffering for greater renewal. His priests might wear flayed skins as ceremonial garb and practice ritual bloodletting, creating distinctive visual and thematic elements for your game. Zorya, or rather the three Zorya goddesses of Slavic mythology, guard the Doomsday Hound chained to Polaris. A character devoted to them might have powers related to astrology, protection, and imprisonment, perfect for a campaign involving cosmic threats or extraplanar entities. Nodens, a Celtic Romano healing god associated with dogs, dreams, and hunting, offers a perfect patron for a ranger or druid with divinatory abilities. His forgotten temples might contain dream-inducing chambers where adventurers can receive prophetic visions. To effectively incorporate these forgotten deities into your campaigns, start by selecting gods whose domains align with your campaign themes. For a nautical adventure, consider Manannan Mac Lir, the Irish sea god, rather than the more familiar Poseidon. Research the deity's original mythology, but don't feel constrained by it. Ancient religions were fluid, with worship practices and divine attributes evolving over time. Your game world's version of these gods can reflect this evolution. Create distinctive visual elements for each deity's temples, priests, and manifestations. The more specific these details, the more memorable the god will become for your players. A priest of Nanshi, Sumerian goddess of social justice, might carry scales and wear fish scale armor, creating an immediate visual identity. Finally, consider how these forgotten gods interact with better-known deities in your pantheon. Perhaps they're rivals, allies, or servants of more powerful gods. These relationships create natural plot hooks for divine politics that can drive campaign narratives. Remember that in role-playing games, as in ancient times, gods gain power through worship and remembrance. By bringing these forgotten deities to your gaming table, you're participating in a modern form of myth-making, breathing new life into divine beings that time forgot. Literature has long been fascinated with forgotten gods. From Robert Graves to Neil Gaiman, authors have explored what happens to deities when worship fades. These narratives often serve as metaphors for cultural change and obsolescence, asking profound questions about the nature of divinity itself. The literary treatment of forgotten gods typically falls into several categories: gods in exile, adapting to a world that no longer worships them; gods diminished, their powers waning as their followers dwindle; gods transformed, taking new forms to survive in the modern world; and gods rediscovered, awakening to find a world changed beyond recognition. These literary explorations reveal our complex relationship with divinity and immortality. They ask, if gods can be forgotten, what truly constitutes immortality? And what does divine impermanence tell us about our own mortality and legacy? Neil Gaiman's American Gods stands as perhaps the most comprehensive exploration of forgotten deities in contemporary literature. Gaiman portrays gods as immigrants who traveled to America with their worshippers, now struggling to survive as belief wanes. The novel's protagonist, Shadow, encounters gods working as morticians, prostitutes, and con artists, divine beings reduced to finding niches in a world that has moved on. Terry Pratchett's Small Gods takes a more satirical approach. Here, the once mighty god Om has been reduced to inhabiting the form of a tortoise, with only one true believer remaining. Pratchett literally shows gods shrinking as their followers diminish, creating a direct visual metaphor for the relationship between worship and divine power. In Mary Renault's historical novel The King Must Die, we see ancient religions in transition, with older gods being absorbed or replaced by newer ones. This reflects the historical reality of how pantheons evolved, with deities being syncretized or relegated to minor roles as cultures changed. A.S. Byatt's Ragnarok reframes Norse mythology through the perspective of a child during World War II, drawing parallels between divine apocalypse and human conflict, suggesting that gods die when the cultures that created them are transformed by catastrophe. The literary theme of divine impermanence serves multiple narrative and philosophical functions. First, it humanizes the divine, making gods relatable by giving them vulnerabilities and fears. When Gaiman's Wednesday, a manifestation of Odin, fears obsolescence, Readers connect with his existential anxiety despite his divine nature. Second, forgotten gods become powerful metaphors for cultural change and loss. When authors depict ancient deities struggling in the modern world, they're often commenting on how industrialization, globalization, or technological change has transformed human society and values. Third, divine mortality raises profound questions about the nature of existence itself. If gods, supposedly eternal beings, can die through forgetting, what constitutes true immortality? Many authors suggest that stories themselves are the only true immortality, as even gods survive only as long as their narratives endure. Finally, the theme allows for exploration of belief itself. In works like Pratchett's Small Gods or Douglas Adams' The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, the authors examine how faith functions, suggesting that gods are created and sustained by human belief rather than the other way around. Contemporary literature continues to find new ways to reimagine forgotten deities. Madeline Miller's Circe gives voice to a minor goddess from Greek mythology, exploring how divine beings on the periphery of major myths might have experienced events. Miller transforms a footnote character into a complex protagonist with her own agency and perspective. Silvia Moreno Garcia's Gods of Jade and Shadow resurrects the Mayan god of death, Huncain, placing him in 1920s Mexico, a world where ancient beliefs clash with modernization. The novel explores how forgotten gods might adapt to changing times while maintaining their essential nature. In poetry, Ocean Vuong and Natalie Diaz incorporate forgotten deities from their cultural heritages, using them to explore themes of cultural identity, colonization, and resistance. These poets demonstrate how ancient gods can become powerful symbols in contemporary discussions of heritage and belonging. Video games like Hades by Supergiant Games have created interactive literary experiences that introduce players to lesser-known aspects of Greek mythology, proving that new media can revitalize interest in forgotten gods through innovative storytelling approaches. These contemporary works suggest that forgotten gods remain potent literary devices precisely because they exist at the intersection of history, belief, and imagination. They allow authors to explore timeless human concerns through figures that carry the weight of actual worship while offering creative selves as about ancient beliefs. We preserve deities that speak to universal human experiences, that star in compelling narratives, and that adapt to changing cultural contexts. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of forgotten gods is that they're never truly gone. They wait in ancient texts and obscure references, ready to be rediscovered and reimagined by each new generation. In that way, no god is ever truly forgotten, just temporarily overlooked. This cycle of remembering and forgetting raises an intriguing question. Which modern cultural icons might be worshipped as gods 1,000 years from now? And which of today's celebrities and heroes will fade like Koalamos, the Greek god of stupidity? For Chronicus Blasphemous, I'm Krista. We're giving away 3 free promo codes for the audio novel Chronicus Blasphemous, The Succubus Queen on Audible.com and 3 more on Audible, so UK to the first 3 viewers to comment on this video. Please like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Until next time, stay blasphemous, folks.